Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You've sent us a collection of source material this time that is, well, without exaggeration, it's a wild mix. It feels less like a curated playlist or a neat stack of research papers,
Oh, definitely.
and more like archaeological fragments you've somehow managed to piece together.
Absolutely. It's not every day you get like German hip hop transcripts sitting right next to notes on folklore, detailed analyses of a notoriously chaotic podcast, and then these really puzzling sci-fi logbook entries. It feels fundamentally strange, dense, like something dug up from beneath
Yeah.
layers of, well, something.
Exactly. It really is a grab bag. You got these pretty clean lyrical analyses of songs right next to um, raw, noisy transcriptions of something else entirely different.
hmm
And there are these academic-style deep dives into specific concepts mixed right in with notes that feel almost pulled from private chats or, I don't know, observations of something deeply unsettling.
And the subject matter itself just leaps all over the place. From these abstract themes of dystopia and isolation to incredibly specific, sometimes really aggressive language,
Mhm.
then it veers into these surreal, almost mythic narratives, and then bam, it hits you with jarring technical details.
It really does feel like stepping into its own distinct universe. But, and this seems crucial, the universe that's not presented neatly at all,
Yeah.
it feels shattered.
Yeah, like looking at reflections through a broken mirror. The pieces are there, right? They might even be from the same original thing, but they're distorted, they're fragmented, multiplied.
Yeah.
It's chaotic, but that chaos, it almost feels intentional.
Which brings us to the core mission for this particular deep dive, wading through all this with you. While, each piece is fascinating on its own, the music, that podcast, the logs, the real mystery, and what you really asked us to dig into lies in understanding how they actually relate to each other.
Right. Our goal isn't just to summarize what's in each document. I mean, that would only give us that fragmented view we were talking about. The real work, and what you've tasked us with, is to explicitly analyze the crosstowns, as you put it,
Yeah.
to find the threads linking these seemingly totally separate worlds, and to see what kind of coherent or maybe terrifyingly incoherent picture emerges when we actually treat this entire collection as like one interconnected data set.
So we're going to try and thoroughly illuminate the various areas of what we've kind of started calling the Doziverse, based purely on these sources you've provided, but with a really special focus on those numerous, sometimes surprising cross-connections between them.
Yeah.
It feels less like just doing a deep dive into a topic and more like trying to find the hidden melody within all these layers of fragmentation you've given us.
It's like the deep dive within the deep dive. Okay, so let's jump into exploring the landscape first. Maybe starting with the most concrete anchor point in all this material.
The music.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Yep.
Based on the sources you've sent, especially those detailed analyses, the Dozer Crew's music really does seem to serve as this central gravitational pull for this whole collection. Yeah, the anchor point.
Right. It's grounded in German hip-hop, so it brings that expected raw, energetic sound. But the very first thing the analyses jump on is this jarring mix with surprisingly dark, even apocalyptic themes.
Bleak is definitely the word that comes up.
Bleak, yes, but intensely thematic. The lyric analyses, like the ones we see in the Uriger Stritzuger, Klubgard, or Verberg melody transcripts, they paint a really consistent picture. Core themes of like dystopia, societal collapse, deep isolation, and this pervasive feeling of being trapped.
Mm-hmm.
And importantly, the sources point out, it's not just a physical trap. It's presented as digital and emotional confinement, too. Feeling stuck within a crumbling society, or maybe even just stuck inside yourself.
So right from the start, the insight is that this music isn't just hip-hop beats. It's being used as a vehicle to explore these really profound psychological and societal states of decay. Exactly. And
Yeah.
we see this play out really clearly in specific tracks mentioned in the analyses. Gang and Loop and Jailbreak, for instance. They viscerally convey that feeling of being stuck in a repetitive cycle, that desperate need to break free. It's that cyclical thing you mentioned.
Yeah.
The analyses note hints that maybe a digital revolution is seen as the only way out, a fight for liberation using technology itself.
Which leads directly into mainframe revolution, doesn't it?
Right. This track seems to push that digital struggle even further. It's explicitly about hacking the system, about leveraging the power of bits and bytes to reshape the world. But, and the sources highlight this as a key tension, it's tempered by this warning that shadows lurk.
Oh.
So the digital space isn't presented as some pure escape route. It's shown as a battleground where control is fiercely contested.
Okay, then there's Uriger Streifzug, the Eternal Roaming March. The imagery described in the analysis sounds relentlessly grim.
Oh, it is. It depicts this endless zombie march through desolate, empty city streets. It just embodies this profound, inescapable sense of doom and decay. It's about, like, grabbing at nothingness, feeling utterly lost in chaos.
Wow.
And the psychological depth is really key here. There's one line quoted in the analysis from the Uriger Streifzug transcript that really stuck with me. Seelen schreien sacht im Chaos. Souls crying softly caught in chaos. The analysis points out this isn't just about some external apocalypse. It's really looking at the internal emotional toll, the psychological state of living trapped within that kind of collapse. It's heavy, affecting stuff.
And yet, contrasted with that, there's Verberg Jane Melody, the hidden melody. This track apparently offers a striking contrast.
It does. It explores finding a strange kind of freedom in isolation, maybe even in surrender. But as the analyses are quick to note, this isn't exactly cheerful freedom we're talking about.
Right.
It's set against this backdrop of biting cold and encroaching shadows.
So freedom, but it sounds pretty bleak still.
Exactly. It presents this deep paradoxical yearning. Ein Wunsch nach freien Fesseln, literally a wish for free shackles. The sources highlight the beißenden Kalt in der Luft, the biting chill, as this potent warning or maybe an inherent danger. There's mention of einem einsamen Stern, a lonely star. Is that meant as a distant hope? Or is it just emphasizing the profound loneliness? And there's this sense of surrendering into silent darkness, Triebe fort in stiller Dunkelheit. It suggests a bleaker, more melancholic kind of freedom, perhaps one only found in withdrawal or dissolution from the world's overwhelming chaos.
That Schleif, the loop, you mentioned it, seems to be a really recurring concept, doesn't it? Picked up again in the analyses of tracks like Nebelnacht and Jürger Streifzug.
It really does. And the insight here from the analyses is that it's not just about the literal zombie shuffle we see in Jürger Streifzug.
Right.
The sources emphasize this feeling of being cut in the loop, trapped in these repetitive cycles, personal, psychological, societal, circumstantial, all of it.
Like being on a hamster wheel, you can't get off.
Exactly that. It's this inability to move forward, just perpetually repeating the same patterns. This feeling of being stuck seems absolutely fundamental to the universe being described in their music.
And beyond the lyrics, the atmosphere itself is presented as a narrative tool. The sources detail the deliberate use of unsettling imagery and soundscapes, the omnipresent zombies, that suffocating fog, Nebel, the encroaching shadows, even these primal guttural sounds like gender law that are noted in the Schatten-Wissen analyses.
It's intensely atmospheric. They're clearly trying to create a universe that feels consistently uneasy and decaying. That fog, for example, der Nebel kriecht rein, verschluckt die Welt. The fog creeps in, swallows the world. The analysis suggests it isn't just bad weather. No, it's framed more as a metaphor for uncertainty, confusion, despair. Maybe even a malevolent force that's deliberately obscuring reality, making perception itself unreliable.
And the shadows, with their Katzen der Clown, hungrig und gnadenlos, scratching claws, hungry and merciless, that sounds predatory.
Very much so. Are they meant to be the dark side of humanity unleashed in this collapsed world? Or are they external malevolent forces closing in? The analysis suggests the atmosphere is absolutely integral to the stories they're trying to tell.
What's really striking, though, and this is a key observation in the sources, is the contrast you mentioned earlier between these incredibly bleak themes and disturbing soundscapes.
Yeah.
And the energetic, sometimes even upbeat or kind of kitschy beats that accompany them.
Yeah, it's jarring, right. But in a fascinating way, why do that? Why that tension?
Exactly.
Well, the analyses offer some compelling suggestions. Is it maybe a coping mechanism? Injecting energy or defiance into the despair? Is it a form of resistance through creation? Or maybe finding a grim energy within the decay itself? Or perhaps the music, the beat itself, is meant to be a lifeline, a guide through the chaos.
The beat is a guide.
Yeah, the idea that the beat isn't just accompaniment, it's an active force. As noted in the analysis of Nebelnacht, there's that line, Der Beat führt mich wieder heim. The beat leads me home again. Even when you're lost in the fog, the rhythm provides direction, maybe a hint of belonging.
So that contrast, then, is crucial. It prevents it from just being pure despair. It creates this dynamic tension, maybe struggle, maybe even resilience.
Exactly. We also see explorations of unsettling internal transformation, like the description in Infect of actually becoming a zombie, losing your humanity, a kind of corruption spreading from within. The analysis suggests it's less about an external bite and more about internal rot.
Great.
And the intense isolation depicted in Fen, being utterly alone in a sprawling, empty city. Again, the sources highlight these not just as external events, but as deeply internal psychological states.
Finally, before we move on from the music, the analysis of their remix work, the 1187 TRX analysis, reveals something important about their creative approach, doesn't it? They tackle this incredibly diverse range of artists: Manson, Prodigy, Daft Punk, Snoop Dogg.
Wagner, yeah, that breath is wild.
Yes, Wagner.
Yeah.
The sheer range and apparently the imaginative titles they give these remixes points to this broad, almost borderless musical intelligence and versatility. It suggests they don't just remix, they engage with and reinterpret whole sonic and cultural worlds, pulling them into their own distinct universe. It shows a real lack of creative boundaries.
Okay, let's pivot now, because this is where the source material really begins to broaden dramatically, pulling in elements that go way beyond the music itself. We need to look at how they integrate folklore, specifically the figures of the Klabauterman and the Sandman. This is detailed in sources like the Klabautergorn Deep Dive and the Pakik Analysis.
Right, the Klabautermann. So the traditional Klabautermann, as described in German maritime folklore in these sources, is that fascinating little ship spirit or cobalt figure. His name is apparently linked to rattling or caulking ships, highlighting his presence and activity on board.
The ship's ghost, essentially.
Kind of. And he's inherently ambivalent, sometimes helpful, patching leaks or predicting storms, but also mischievous, causing strange noises, and sometimes his appearance is a dire omen, predicting doom for the ship.
Yeah, he embodies that duality. He can be the spirit guide or the harbinger of doom. Doza Crew, according to the sources, gives him this decidedly modern, urban, and even digital update. He leaves the wooden ship, moving durch Beton und Technik, through concrete and technology.
He becomes this kind of urban explorer, someone who knows the city's hidden pathways, its infrastructure, its underbelly. And the crucial insight here, as the sources point out, is that he retains his core function of possessing insider knowledge.
Precisely. On a ship, he knew the rotten timbers, the weak spots, right?
Right.
In the urban landscape, the analysis translates this to knowing its hidden ways, its vulnerabilities, the secret flows of the city. And importantly, they explicitly extend this knowledge to the digital realm. He becomes a system insider, navigating complex networks in digital space, just like he once navigated the planks and rigging of a ship.
So the Klabautermann is essentially reimagined as a hacker.
Pretty much, yeah. He navigates wires and data streams like rigging and planks. The city and the network become his new ships, vast, complex, full of hidden dangers and secret passages.
The sources also seem to show this modern Klabautermann as an active participant, sometimes even a fighter. He's described battling figures like Krampus.
That old figure of punishment, yeah, mentioned in Klabautergorn.
And other nightmare creatures like something called the Naziel, which sounds like maybe a unique creation within this lore. Sometimes he's fighting alongside a mysterious figure called the Trumpenzaren, described as a dream dancer.
This is a really powerful collision, isn't it? An ancient, almost elemental force of fear like Krampus facing off with this transformed ship spirit in a modern urban landscape.
Yeah.
It injects old myths directly into new urban anxieties.
So is this Klabautermann a protector then? A rebel against these dark powers?
The analysis seems to frame him that way sometimes, yeah. As a figure of resistance challenging the darkness, whether that darkness is mythical or represents more modern forces of control or fear.
And that digital transformation, which is explored in tracks like Mainframe Revolution and Klubetarn, seems key. He becomes a hacker, navigating data seas, overcoming firewalls. His traditional talents, knowing the structure, finding hidden ways, are applied directly to cyberspace.
But the analyses also reveal a darker, more melancholic side to him. In the track Klubgard, he's apparently called Sklave Sans Hern, a slave of his master.
A slave to who or what?
Exactly. That's the question the analysis raises. He seems constantly on the run, pursued not just by enemies, but by memory, like this figure called the Eisfremder the frozen man in the city. There's this layer of tragic depth.
So more mystery. Is he a slave to his own nature, trapped by the modern world? Or is there an actual, literal master controlling him?
This complexity is a key insight from the sources. He's clearly not just a simple trickster or a straightforward rebel. The analysis presents him as this really burdened figure, potentially trapped within the very systems he seems to master, grappling with his own demons.
Okay, building on that folklore theme, the Sandman also makes an appearance, right?
Yeah.
Mentioned in the track Sandman and referenced in Potcake and Crew.
Ah, the Sandman. And the sources are very clear. This is definitely not the friendly version from traditional tales.
Not at all, it sounds like. Doza presents a significantly darker, much more unsettling figure here. He doesn't just bring pleasant dreams, he brings nightmares.
Yikes.
Yeah, he's described as abducting children, leaving sand that causes actual pain or blindness, even causing hearts to bleed. It's a really chilling inversion of the familiar, comforting figure.
The Pakic analysis explicitly links this dark Sandman with the Klabauterman we were just discussing. Both in this universe seem to inhabit the fringes, these liminal spaces between the known and the unknown, waking and sleeping, the urban world, and something else.
They're both kind of uncanny figures, then blurring the lines of reality.
Exactly. They both hold the potential for comfort, though maybe a perverted kind of comfort now, and profound terror. They seem tied to fate or destiny, acting as agents within a large, often unsettling design. Agents of destiny, as the analysis puts it.
Interesting.
It also notes the contrast between the Sandman's subtle magic operating through dreams and nightmares and Krampus's brute physical force. In the track Pakic, the Sandman apparently loses that confrontation, suggesting that subtle influence isn't always enough against raw power in this world.
Okay, prepare for another pretty dramatic shift here. This next section of the source material feels, at least on the surface, entirely disconnected from the music and folklore we've been talking about. We're diving into the Mike's Waffenfacts podcast, which is detailed in transcripts and analyses like the Doza Deeper Dive Mike's Waffenfacts transcripts.
Right, the chaotic podcast. The sources described this show as, well, wildly politically incorrect seems like an understatement. A mix of weapons talk, increasingly elaborate conspiracy theories, and apparently heavy drinking on air.
Sounds like a recipe for something volatile. Yet the sources say it cultivated a really dedicated, passionate fan base.
Yeah. And the source analyses paint quite a picture of the hosts. Mike, apparently obsessed with weapons, known for crude, offensive humor, described as Grubschläger, sort of rough around the edges, unpolished. He drinks heavily, which raises the question the analyses pose. How much of that was performance versus his genuine state? There's even a hint he might have a layered past, maybe an ex-roadie or something.
Okay. And then there's Rickard.
Ah, Rickard. The resident conspiracy theorist, according to the analyses, he's the engine driving the increasingly wild narratives, prone to heated arguments often fueled by the drinking. He seems utterly convinced by his convoluted theories, no matter how outlandish they become. And here's where it gets really interesting and kind of alarming. The sources note that later on, Rickard himself starts worrying that Mike is losing touch with reality.
Wait, hang on. The conspiracy theorist thinks the other guy's losing touch with the reality. That's a pretty alarming indicator, isn't it?
It truly is. And then there was Ryaka, the sound engineer, described as the perennial butt of their jokes, a black metal fan, apparently long-sufferingly trying to keep the tech running amidst the chaos. His exit is noted in the analyses as significant. He apparently couldn't take it anymore, was genuinely upset. It suggests the environment became truly toxic and disturbing, marking a kind of turning point.
You can't really blame him based on the description.
No, not at all. Then there's the mysterious sponsor, Schwatten, who gets mentioned quite a bit in the analyses. Apparently not just running ads, but actually supplying items, some seemingly quite dangerous or bizarre, that were then discussed or even demonstrated on air.
So more than just a sponsor.
Definitely seems that way. The analyses strongly suggest Schwatten was a significant influence, raising profound questions about their true role, their motivations, their agenda in supporting this kind of platform. What were they getting out of it?
The show's descent into weirder and potentially more dangerous territory seems meticulously documented in these sources. The weapons focus apparently went beyond standard stuff, delving into experimental or way out there concepts, though the sources don't give specific examples, it's implied. Opinions became more extreme, more unsettling, venturing into praising dictators, which the sources rightly call risky territory and ethically dubious, to say the least.
Then there were the segments described as pure nonsense, like a heated debate on the legality of something called an arch bomb.
An arch bomb? You're kidding me. What is that?
Apparently, it involved cannonballing off a building onto an enemy. The analysis calls it pure nonsense, but notes it was treated with bizarre seriousness by the hosts.
Wow.
Rickard's theories apparently reached stratospheric levels of absurdity. He was convinced something called the Solar Soul and Staff, SSS, whatever that is, was alien tech intended for a Mars invasion scheduled for 2035. He even started linking his own physical ailments to these sprawling theories, completely blurring the lines between his beliefs, his physical state, and reality.
It sounds like a complete mess.
And the sources highlight a significant debate that apparently existed among the audience and the analysts looking back at it. Where exactly was the line between satire, dark humor, and something genuinely offensive or dangerous? Was the show normalizing extreme views or desensitizing people? An ethical tightrope regardless of what their intent might have been.
And then came the end. The abrupt, terrifying vanishing act that concluded season 2. The sources call it the wild part. Rickard, hyped up, apparently on the verge of revealing some huge truth in episode 600, is explicitly abducted mid-show by unknown figures.
Abducted? On air? That doesn't sound like typical podcast drama or a rating stunt.
No, it really doesn't. The recording apparently cuts out during the chaos, but Mike's fragmented account just before his own connection is cut off is chilling. He claims he saw a gigantic meddling gestalt, described as a gigantic metallic or perhaps just shapeless figure right there in the studio with them moments before he too apparently vanished.
A gestalt. What does that even mean in this context? A shapeless figure. It's incredibly unclear, deliberately ambiguous maybe. The complete lack of information afterwards just fuels immense speculation and wild theories, adding this layer of genuine mystery and horror that goes way beyond a show just getting canceled or ending abruptly.
The audience, noted in the sources as large, dedicated, and surprisingly diverse, not just the expected group, apparently debated this constantly afterwards. And finally, adding another layer, there's this unnerving rumor documented in the sources. A lost paranormal-themed episode that supposedly aired just prior to the abduction. It's vaguely but disturbingly described as catastrophic and deeply unsettling.
A lost episode, of course. There's a lost episode. A video of it reportedly existed but never surfaced, adding yet another layer of ambiguous horror. What could have been on it, we don't know, but the implication is deeply disturbing.
Okay, deep breaths. Time for another significant turn and another completely distinct set of sources. The NVCRW logbook, #001, and the Nova Crew Mayday message. These are analyzed in sources like the DOZA Deeper Dive Crew lore transcripts, and this plunges us explicitly into a sci-fi narrative.
Right, the sci-fi log. So the NDCRW logbook details this complex story about a figure named Tyrant Graph Paste, described basically as the most evil ruler imaginable, who has plunged their world into chaos. And there's this small, seemingly ill-equipped team trying to stop him.
And the team members are, well, they're interesting, according to the logs. Florian, codenamed GRD, described as a spaced-out botanist and pilot. Karina, a glitch weapons expert who is prone to hallucinations. And Christian, the high-tech guy who is always described as Zootic.
Zootic?
Yeah, the analysis implies it means perpetually high or on drugs.
So not exactly SEAL Team 6, then. The sources consistently highlight the drug use and altered states of perception among the team as a really significant factor in their story.
Graph Paste's plan, meanwhile, is terrifyingly simple in its scale. He wants to explode their solar system's sun.
Okay, go big or go home, I guess. Wow.
Predictably, perhaps, the team's mission to stop him is a catastrophic failure. It's attributed specifically to Florian's mistake, which is somehow linked to figures named Lunatic and Tyrannant.
More strange names popping up. And the consequence of this failure, it rips open a wormhole, a tear in reality, leading to a parallel dimension or solar system called Regulus 5.
So they accidentally jump dimensions. Following this wormhole, they arrive at Regulus 5. Now, initially, the logbook describes it as a seeming paradise. They're welcomed, they're hailed as heroes. It sounds like they've escaped, maybe even achieved a successful outcome from a certain twisted perspective. Florian is even reunited with someone named Luna, which adds this personal, seemingly hopeful element.
A paradise found after an apocalypse. Sounds a bit too good to be true, doesn't it?
Exactly. And chillingly, the Nova Crew Mayday message confirms that suspicion. This is a separate, desperate source, apparently recorded by another group, the Nova Crew, who also arrived in Regulus 5 at some point.
The Mayday message. Okay, this sounds critical.
It is. It's a direct, chilling contradiction to the logbook's description of paradise. It contains these stark, terrifying warnings. Regulus 5 is off on a file, which the analysis translates as Regulus 5 is on a folly, or more directly, Regulus 5 is a trap.
A trap, called it.
The message desperately pleads with the listener, presumably you, the person receiving these sources, to read the logbook carefully. The truth, it warns, is hidden. It's disguised. You have to read between the lines of that hopeful account to see the reality.
What are the specific warnings?
They're dire. Luna, who seemed like that hopeful element in the logbook, isn't trustworthy. Apparently everything is an illusion in Regulus 5, the paradise is a lie. And crucially, amidst these panicked warnings of deception, the message explicitly mentions the mainframe.
The mainframe. There it is again. Same term used in the Doza Crew lyrics.
Exactly. And the message cuts off abruptly, consumed by panic, with these fragmented, shouted words, "Mainframe life, Kiram Doza Odawa." This final phrase, packed with names and concepts that echo other sources, is a critical point of intersection. Kiram, Doza, in a desperate message from another dimension.
Wow, okay.
And adding yet another layer of horror and complexity to this Regulus 5 situation are the Grindman expedition reports, which are also referenced back in the Mike's Waffenfax analysis.
A Grindman expedition.
That's
So
right.
more players involved and another perspective on what Regulus 5 is actually like.
Right, and these reports describe not a paradise, but a horrific, widespread disease or condition. It apparently leads to a zombie-like state characterized by loss of mind, leaving empty bodies that just act on instinct, resulting in something called Zuckerwandern.
Zucker wandern. Sugar wandering.
Yeah, which the analysis interprets more metaphorically as soul wandering, an aimless, lost existence.
Zombie-like state. Loss of mind. Empty bodies. Aimless wandering. That sounds horrifyingly familiar, doesn't it? Echoes the Doza Crew stuff strongly.
It's exactly. The reports also mention an orbital portal and a princess figure, suggesting these might be tied into the pervasive illusion. And most unsettlingly, the report ends with a warning about a distinct sulfur smell, often associated with infernal or dangerous presence in folklore, and ominously mentions Pandora's box, implying that uncovering or unleashing something here could have terrible unforeseen consequences.
Sulfur smell and Pandora's box. Okay, this is getting intensely dark and interconnected.
All right, this is where the real deep dive happens, I think. We've explored the individual source streams, the music, the folklore, the chaotic podcast, the sci-fi logs and reports. Now, the crucial part, the part you really asked us to focus on, is moving beyond summarizing them separately and explicitly bringing it all together.
Connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah. Showing the concrete links, the unexpected crosstowns across these incredibly disparate materials. This isn't just German hip-hop and folklore and a podcast and sci-fi existing in parallel. This is where these seemingly separate worlds don't just collide. They overlap and they bleed into one another in potentially terrifying ways, forming this larger fragmented picture.
Let's start with perhaps the most prominent, the most undeniable, and maybe the most utterly bewildering link we found. The figure of Kiram.
Kiram, yes. Okay, so piecing it together from the different sources. We know Kiram was the sound engineer who replaced Rianka on the Mike's Waffenfax podcast. He was the one who seemed nervous during that final aborted episode 600 right before the abduction.
Right, the nervous sound guy from the Weird podcast, okay.
Yes. But the sources also list Kiram as a collaborator with Doza Crew on their album Digital Age.
A music collaborator with Doza Crew, okay, that's interesting.
And then, chillingly, Kiram is mentioned by name in that panicked, fragmented Nova Crew Mayday message, the one warning about the Regulus 5 trap. In that final phrase, mainframe life, Kiram Doza Odawa.
Okay, let's analyze this nexus point then. Kiram isn't just some minor character popping up randomly. He's a figure explicitly bridging three wildly different domains: the chaotic, reality-bending MWF podcast environment, Doza Crew's artistic output and maybe their in-universe presence, and the potentially cosmic, interdimensional events happening in the Regulus 5 dimension described in the sci-fi logs.
He is the common thread, or at least he seems to be a major one. This raises enormous questions, obviously. Was he just a technician caught in the wrong place at the wrong time in the MWF studio? Or did his role as both a sound engineer for that chaotic show and a music collaborator with Doza Crew give him some kind of access or knowledge that genuinely connected these worlds? Did he know about the trap in Regulus 5? Was he somehow involved in those events or connected to the Nova Crew's fate?
His nervousness in the podcast studio suddenly makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When you connect his documented nervousness just before the abduction with the fact that he's being named in a panicked warning originating from another dimension about a trap in the mainframe, it takes on a completely new, chilling meaning. It strongly suggests he was aware of something much bigger, perhaps implicated, or maybe just an imminent danger from the same forces that seem to be operating across these different levels of reality.
Okay, next major connection. Let's explicitly link the concept of the mainframe. We discussed Doza Crew's lyrics, especially in tracks like Mainframe Revolution and Gang and Loop, repeatedly exploring this idea of fighting or escaping a digital prison, a vast controlling mainframe.
Right, the digital prison idea from the music analyses. Then we have the Nova Crew's desperate Mayday message, warning specifically about the Regulus 5 trap, explicitly mentioning the mainframe as part of the immediate danger they were facing.
This connection feels far too strong to just dismiss as coincidence, right? Is this the same mainframe? The sources seem to present it not just as a simple computer system, but potentially as a vast controlling entity, maybe a digital structure or consciousness that exerts influence or control across multiple realities or dimensions.
So the implication is the Doza Crew songs might be more literal than they first appear.
That's what the parallel suggests. The seemingly metaphorical or dystopian lyrics about fighting or being trapped in a mainframe might not be just social commentary or allegory. They could be describing the actual controlling force that the Nova Crew warned about in those sci-fi logs. Their art might be a reflection or even a warning about this pervasive, possibly transdimensional entity.
Okay, wow. Then there are the pervasive zombie and decay themes that run like a dark thread through so many of these sources. Doza's music, as we discussed, is saturated with imagery of zombies, eternal wandering, loss of mind, physical and internal decay seen in tracks like Uriger Streifzug or Infect.
All that bleak imagery we talked about earlier, yeah. And chillingly, the Grindman expedition reports from Regulus 5 explicitly describe a disease causing a zombie-like state, characterized by direct loss of mind, leaving empty bodies acting purely on instinct, resulting in that same kind of aimless, Zuckerwandern soul wandering.
This is a powerful, explicit parallel that really demands attention. Dozer Crew's artistic depiction of this zombie-like decay, often tied to societal collapse or loss of identity in their lyrics, directly mirrors the description of a horrific disease documented in the parallel Regulus 5 dimension.
It's almost too perfect a match to be separate phenomena, isn't it?
It really is. How is this possible? It strongly suggests that Doza's lyrics and artistic universe aren't purely fictional creations isolated in our reality. Could they be somehow chronicling, describing, or tapping into events and conditions like this zombie plague that are actually happening in these other terrifying realities or dimensions? Their art might be functioning as a conduit or a mirror for events spanning this interconnected and, frankly, quite horrifying universe.
Let's also explicitly connect the pervasive theme of illusion and fragile reality. We saw the Nova Crew's Mayday message explicitly state everything is an illusion in Regulus 5. The paradise is a trap based entirely on deception.
Right, the trap world concept. Then you have Doza Cruz music, which constantly seems to blur the lines between reality and dreams, explores the uncanny, presents distorted or manipulated realities. Think of tracks like Kaleidoscope Your Traum or The Figure of the Dark Sandman.
The Sandman connection again, yeah. And even the Mike's Waffenfax podcast, in its own chaotic way, has strong elements of blurred reality. Was the host's increasingly bizarre behavior real or performance? Where some characters mentioned like Gasbold, even real or just fictional constructs within their narrative. And then there's that profoundly ambiguous reality-bending ending.
This theme, unstable, manipulated reality, appears in different forms, but it appears consistently across all the different types of sources you provided. It strongly suggests that the universe being hinted at here is one where the very nature of what is real is questionable, perhaps subject to deliberate manipulation by unseen forces.
Like reality itself is the ultimate trap.
Maybe. And perhaps that twisted Sandman figure we discussed, the unsettling agent of dreams and nightmares in Doza's lore, is more than just a metaphor in this context. Could he be an actual agent of this pervasive illusion, actively working to blur the lines between dreams, nightmares, and perceived reality across the different levels of this universe?
We could also explore potential character parallels based on the analyses. The NVCRW team from the sci-fi logs, Florian, Karina, Christian, are explicitly described as using drugs and experiencing altered states. Remember the Zudict crew? This kind of echoes the detachment from baseline reality we see described in the Mike's Waffenfax hosts, Mike and Rickard, who were heavily influenced by drinking, absorbed in wild theories, and interacting with Schwatten's strange, possibly reality-altering items.
So are the MWF hosts in their chaotic, detached, altered states somehow mirroring or subconsciously influenced by figures like the NVCRW team who were struggling with perception and reality in Regulus 5? Are they like echoes of each other across dimensions?
Or perhaps they're architects, individuals whose detachment from conventional reality makes them particularly susceptible to glimpsing or even interacting with elements of this larger, stranger universe. It implies that altered perception might be a key, perhaps even a dangerous way, to interface with this universe's underlying, maybe hidden, nature.
Let's consider the figures of influence, too. You have the mysterious Schwatten, the MWF sponsor, and Tyrant Graphpaste from the NVCRW logbook. Their roles seem different on the surface, a sponsor versus an evil ruler, but both are presented as figures of significant, often malevolent influence or facilitation. They introduce dangerous elements, they cause chaos.
Could they represent different manifestations or agents of a similar kind of malevolent force or facilitator operating across these different levels? The puppet masters behind the curtain.
It's possible. Schwatten seems to foster chaos and extremity in the MWF podcast world. Graphpaste causes a world-ending disaster that leads directly to interdimensional travel and traps. Both act as catalysts for deeply unsettling or disastrous events. It hints at a coordinating intelligence or power behind the scenes, pulling strings, introducing destabilizing elements across different realities.
Okay, let's revisit the abrupt, bizarre, frankly terrifying end of Mike's Waffen-Facts one more time. Ricard's abduction on air, Mike seeing that gigantic meddling gestalt in his studio, Kyram's documented nervousness right before it all went down.
Right, the Gestalt sighting. When we analyze this ending specifically through the lens of the NVCRW logs and the Nova Crew Mayday message, it takes on a chilling new dimension. It becomes much harder to dismiss as just a stunt or a collective hallucination or even just some kind of government crackdown.
The abduction by unknown figures, combined with Mike's description of seeing something immense, powerful, and seemingly non-human. Could these be the same forces behind the Regulus 5 trap? Agents of the mainframe, perhaps?
So the implication is the podcast studio itself became a doorway.
It suggests that, doesn't it? That the chaotic, reality-bending environment fostered by MWF somehow became a weak point, an unexpected intersection where these larger, terrifying events from potentially other dimensions could manifest and interfere directly. Mundane reality was breached by something cosmic and horrifying.
And that phrase, Doza Odawa, in the Nova Crew Mayday message, right alongside mainframe life, Kiram. It's a direct, completely unexplained link back to the Doza Crew themselves.
This phrase, uttered in desperate panic in another dimension while warning about a trap and the mainframe. It feels like a critical piece of the puzzle. It directly connects Doza Crew's name, their art, their universe, to these complex sci-fi mystery elements.
So they're directly involved somehow, or at least perceived to be involved by the Nova Crew. It reinforces the idea that this isn't just music commenting on themes from afar. The crew themselves, or something associated with them we don't know what Odawa refers to, seem directly connected to, or maybe even players within, this larger reality-spanning mystery.
Finally, let's look at the Greiman report's chilling warning about Pandora's box and the mention of supporters in the shadows. This adds a profound meta layer to everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, the implication of that warning seems to be that investigating this mystery, piecing together these sources, explicitly making these connections like we're doing right now, might itself be a dangerous act.
Like we could be opening Pandora's box by even talking about this, by trying to understand it.
Are there forces, these supporters in the shadows, who actively don't want these connections made, who don't want this larger, underlying, potentially terrifying reality to be understood? This resonates with the darker aspects we've seen elsewhere. The Klabautermann's hinted servitude, the figure of the Dark Sandman, the ambiguous roles of Schwatten and Graphpaste. Perhaps these figures, these ambiguities and contradictions, are the warnings to back away. Agents of forces that prefer to remain hidden, manipulating events across multiple realities, opening Pandora's box, making these connections, might unleash something terrible. The mystery itself could be dangerous to pursue.
So, pulling it all together explicitly, these sources, analyzed not in isolation but specifically for their deep, often unsettling interconnections, they don't seem to be separate stories at all. They feel like fragments of one enormous, complex, and potentially terrifying reality.
It's a mosaic of weirdness, isn't it? Hinted at across different media, different forms of documentation, a reality where folklore figures navigate digital space, where chaotic podcasts intersect with cosmic abductions, where parallel dimensions are revealed as traps of illusion and decay and host zombie-like diseases. The explicit analysis of these crosstowns reveals a universe far larger, stranger, and more interconnected than any single piece suggested on its own.
We've taken a really deep dive into this truly unique stack of sources you provided. By explicitly analyzing and linking the myriad connections between them, the crosscounts we've uncovered, or at least glimpsed, a universe far more vast, complex, and frankly strange than any single source suggested on its own.
Yeah, from German hip-hop exploring urban decay and digital rebellion to ancient ship spirits turned urban hackers navigating concrete and code to chaotic conspiracy podcasts ending in terrifying reality-bending abductions to sci-fi logbooks revealing interdimensional traps and zombie plagues, it genuinely feels like it's all part of one vast fragmented picture, the Dozaverse, if you want to call it that, emerging from these documents.
The key connecting threads that really stood out when we explicitly put these sources side by side. Kiram acting as this linchpin figure, bridging three wildly different domains. The pervasive concept of the mainframe, appearing as both a dystopian metaphor in music and a critical interdimensional entity in the sci-fi warnings.
Definitely. And the chilling parallel between Doza Cruz's artistic depiction of zombies and decay and the descriptions of the disease in the Regulus 5 reports. Then there's the overarching theme of illusion and fragile reality woven through the music, the podcast chaos, and the sci-fi trap narratives.
We can't forget the terrifying intersections suggested by the MWF ending, implying that mundane reality can actually be breached by these larger cosmic forces.
And, of course, that direct mention of Doza Odawa in the Nova Crew Mayday message itself, connecting the crew's name directly somehow to the heart of the interdimensional mystery.
And naturally, analyzing all these connections only leads to more, perhaps even larger, unanswered questions left hanging in the air. What is the mainframe, truly? Who or what is behind it, pulling the strings, weaving these illusions across dimensions?
What actually happened to the Nova Crew after that Mayday message cut off? What was Kyram's full role in all this? And did he survive whatever happened in that studio or whatever connection he had? What is the real significance of the Doza Odawa phrase?
And the gestalt. What was Mike actually seeing in that studio just before he vanished? How does Tyrant Graph-Paste, the sun-exploding villain, fit into the larger structure of control hinted at by the mainframe and Schwann?
So many questions remain. By focusing specifically on how these sources connect, though, a picture emerges where nothing is quite what it seems. Control, illusion, and decay appear pervasive, and different realities might genuinely bleed into one another in deeply unsettling ways.
And you, the listener, you aren't just a passive recipient in this. By providing these sources, by asking us to specifically look for the crosstowns, you're positioned as an active integrator, someone who has to grapple with this tension, confront the fragmentation, and try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, the fragmented, ambiguous nature of the material itself demands your participation. You have to construct meaning, fill in the gaps, interpret the contradictions, grapple with the uncertainty. It's definitely not passive listening or reading. The intentional challenge, which seems hinted at in the sources themselves, like those notes on the Hortz, Dust Collective's Ungeschichte approach to analysis, it requires active, critical, maybe even unconventional engagement. You really have to meet this work on its own terms.
And these sources seem designed to pivot from their internal world to something relevant to your own life. You can use these themes as a mirror. How do you grapple with fragmentation and perception in your daily life, with the information overload we all face? Who or what steers your life? Are there systems of control, visible or invisible, that you navigate? How do you make sense of chaotic or conflicting information streams?
This deep dive becomes a lens, potentially, for your own experiences with language, identity, reality, control, and just the fundamental challenge of trying to make sense of complex, often overwhelming information. But we also have to remember the caution embedded within the sources themselves.
Right. There are warnings. The Han source mentioning an analyst getting infected by the material. The MWF 502 meta-commentary noting analysts feeling unsettled, risking losing the thread, becoming empty holes themselves through the process of analysis.
This caution feels like more than just plot points within the narratives. It feels almost like a meta warning about the process of processing overwhelming, fragmented, potentially disturbing information, maybe even in our own world, outside of these specific sources. The risk of getting lost, of being changed by the very act of trying to understand.
Which leads to perhaps the most provocative thought left hanging by these sources for you, the listener, based on that Pandora's box warning from the Grindman reports and this documented risk to the analyst. When you dive deeply into complex, fragmented, potentially disturbing material like this collection, the sources seem to suggest there's a real risk involved. Not just intellectual effort, but the risk of losing something of yourself in the analysis.
Yeah, the challenging question these sources implicitly pose to you is this. If you look too deeply into the abyss, if you get lost following the patterns, decoding the mysteries, immersing yourself too deeply in unsettling realities, do you risk becoming an empty hole yourself, losing track of who you were, or maybe why you even started looking in the first place?
The core challenge here And perhaps it extends beyond this specific set of materials to engaging with complex or unsettling worlds in general, whether they are fictional narratives or the often confusing realities of our own information-saturated lives, is how do you engage deeply? How do you dive into the weirdness, the complexity, the darkness, and still stay grounded? How do you remain yourself, maintain your own identity, while trying to understand forces that seem designed, perhaps, to pull you apart or consume you?
And we really want to thank you for providing this truly unique and thought-provoking material and for joining us on this particular deep dive. We absolutely encourage you to revisit the sources yourself, look for more clues, more connections we might have missed. The deep dive, in a sense, continues for you.
We've definitely explored a fascinating, strange, often contradictory, but intensely interconnected world presented in these fragments. A world where language is used to challenge, play, and sometimes seem to break down entirely. Where there's constant tension between the group and the individual, between rebellion and control. Where realities, the everyday, the mythical, the surreal, the horrific, seem to blur and bleed into one another constantly.
And throughout it all, the material consistently pulls you, the listener, in. It asks you to interpret, it invites reflection, it even seems to suggest there's a personal cost, or at least a risk, involved in understanding it fully.
Making sense of this isn't a passive process at all. It requires leaning in, working at it, reflecting, much like perhaps navigating the complexities of information and reality in our own lives every day.
And that unsettling final thought remains. Diving deep into this kind of complex, fragmented, disturbing material seems to involve a real risk of losing something of yourself. The question it leaves you with is how to engage deeply and still stay grounded.
Thank you again for joining this exploration. Keep questioning, keep looking for the threads that link seemingly disconnected things in your own world. As these sources might suggest, the truth, or at least a pattern, might be hidden in plain sight, scattered across countless pieces of information you encounter every day.
We'll be here for the next deep dive.